I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So welcome to you all to the Central Safety Group May event. I'm the President of the Central Safety Group, and I hope that you enjoy this presentation that's been put together for you today. Just so you can do some thinking about next month, it's very exciting that we actually are having a site visit, our first one for a very long time, to the Holmes Glen Chadstone campus to visit the Victorian Tunnelling Centre. Very appropriate given the weather outside, and I think certainly very appropriate given the activities with the Metro Tunnel happening in Melbourne. I think it'll be a very topical presentation on Wednesday the 14th of June, actually out at Chadstone, so keep that one in your diaries. We'll send more information at a later date. During the presentation, stay on mute if you can. If you have any questions, use the chat function, and at the close of the presentation, we'll have time for some more informal questions for Mike if you'd like to take those offline. Unfortunately, I've got back-to-back meetings, so I'll be signing off at the end of the presentation. Now, so thank you for all. Before I introduce Mike, I'd like Amanda to maybe introduce some of her team who are joined us today.
Thanks, Nan. So just a heads up, this particular topic was really timely for us here at Melbourne Polytechnic. We had a HSR training session, I think the day before this actual invite was sent out. So it just dovetailed perfectly. And we actually had some devoted time in that training session for this very topic. So it was just seamless. So with that, the invite was extended out with permission from the group around to the HSRs here at MP. So that includes Hugh Fraser. So you just want to give a wave? Yep. Cool. And also to Kardia Zageb. We've also got some latecomers, and they will include Mike Heaney and also to another person called Nick Thorley. Where I've also got to introduce Kate Knoll, who is part of the health, safety and wellbeing team here at Melbourne Poly. So they're the additions for today, and yeah, just like I said, just timely. And so the HSRs are here today just to listen to what Mike's got to share with us, and we look forward.
Yes, I'm also looking forward to Mike's presentation because, again, where I work, we're actually introducing some internal HSR training starting tomorrow, so it might help shape some of our content. But now to actually introduce Mike Craig before we get on to too much of a discussion, Mike Craig is the Health and Safety Representative Support Officer with WorkSafe Victoria. In this role, he trains and coaches Victorian health and safety reps and communicates with a wide range of stakeholders. And I think certainly what Mike tries to do is make a positive difference to safety outcomes in workplaces, which I think we can all learn how to do this better through the consultation communication process. So we're looking forward to your insights, Mike, and over to you.
Thanks, Dan, for that lovely welcome, and welcome everyone. Thank you for letting myself and representing WorkSafe come along today. Basically, we'll talk, the theme for today is around health and safety representatives and health and safety committees, how they can be a partnership in safety in the workplace. My screen is. Hopefully now you should see.
It's looking good.
It comes through.
Yes.
So what we're going to cover today, we're going to do a bit of a reflection just briefly around what's been happening more broadly around the workplace and the sort of view of safety at the moment. A little bit about what Victoria, we're doing from a WorkSafe perspective on its focus, cover some principles of health and safety protection. Could be, revisiting some old ground, but it's just good to touch base around some of the common links. What we're going to talk about, some of the workplace challenges, especially post-COVID, how to make that difference, and then talk about committees, designated work groups, so just reintroduce that concept if it's not as familiar to some of the audience, the value of health and safety reps and why they have powers, what support is available, and just some takeaways, and as was talked about, open up for some questions. So as I said, I wanted to do a bit of a reflective moment, just some stats around Victoria. So there's over 720,000 registered businesses in Victoria, and about 350,000 of those workplaces are covered by WorkSafe. The labour market in Victoria is about 3.5 million people. So if you boil that right down to, I guess the sad side of workplace safety, in the financial year 21-22, 68 Victorian workers lost their lives at work. And already this year, in 2023, we've already had 7 workplace fatalities. We do understand that workplaces are very diverse and have unique challenges. And it's important just to do this reflection, especially a few weeks ago, it was International Workers' Memorial Day, also World Day for Safety Health at Work. And it's just really important about some of those reflections about, about any fatality or any serious injury in the workplace. And last year we've had, over 24,000 people who were injured and had applied for workers' compensation. So I always think about this. It's important to consider, with each worker, contractor, or any other persons that work in, for, or interact with our workplaces across Victoria, and what choices are being made around, workplace safety and health and wellbeing, and how that can impact each one of them when they interact with our various workplaces. So I thought that was time just to really sort of, set the tone of where we can sort of go from here and build upon this. From WorkSafe's perspective, we've got really 2 key purposes, primarily reducing workplace harm. And I think that's probably given, being the health and safety regulator in Victoria, but also being the Workers' Compensation Authority. So that's where that improving outcomes for injured workers. If we're getting the reduction of workplace harm in the workplace, then obviously we'll see that reduction in injured workers and hopefully less of that intervention in getting them back to work. By 2024, WorkSafe strategic outcome is, and it's a lofty goal, but I really think it can really be achieved. Victoria will be the safest place to work in Australia and one of the safest in the world, and be that really, leading and cutting edge, with the way that, work design and work principles can really be, affected the change in a workplace. How are we going to do that from a regulator point of view to support businesses? Firstly, focusing on the workplaces where most of the injuries are predicted to occur. So we're going to use, data and analytics, from our inspector visits, from other things that we see. How are we going to really shape, what we're going to do and put into the marketplace to help businesses, improve that. Look at the most prevalent causes of fatality and where they're most likely to occur. So once again, using that sense of what workplaces are doing, what changes, what refinements, technology improvements can happen. But as we're seeing now, it isn't just the physical health, it's the mental health and wellbeing. So supporting workplaces to be mentally healthy alongside the focus around mental injury prevention. And we know there's been a lot of talk in the last sort of 12 to 18 months around the proposed psychological health regulations. So we know that's still an ongoing piece at the moment, before that will land at some stage. So once again, there's still duty on employers to provide a safe and healthy workplace. So that those principles haven't changed, and WorkSafe's got some great guidance material or existing and ways to help businesses navigate that through how we can best support them. Also, emerging occupational illness and disease. If you watched the news last night, there was some talk about this in the news about affected workers, and we know there's a lot of work happening not just in Victoria but across Australia on that topic, and how we can strengthen that oversight. And where I really sort of fit into the conversation is supporting Victoria's network of health and safety representatives. That's what my role exclusively does, and then by that supporting employers and safety professionals in working more collectively and cooperatively with health and safety representatives as well. And the way we really see it at WorkSafe, the HSRs, we want to enable them and empower them and support them to become, that eyes and ears, to be that conduit, of the workers in the workplace, to work collaboratively with the employer and the management there. And hopefully through that, that arrangement and those great abilities for HSRs to, effectively represent their fellow workers, we see that reduction in workplace harm because they're working, cooperatively and collaboratively and build that trust in the workplace as well. So not every workplace has HSRs, and we do appreciate that. And through this, we're going to talk about some principles and maybe bringing that back, to some foundations and that partnership to really see where that can be built, in workplaces. So just to touch a little bit on the legislation, because there's two key elements in what we see as the principles of health and safety protection. So Section 4 of the OHS Act here in Victoria, there's two key elements, and it relates to the topics we're going to cover today. Employers and employees, should be exchanging information and ideas about risks to health and safety and the measures that can be taken to eliminate or reduce those risks. Irrespective if there's health and safety reps in the organisation, this really comes down to the consultation, that consultative piece. It's one of those key principles that's the foundation of our legislation. And our fifth one is employees are entitled and should be encouraged to be represented in relation to health and safety issues. Once again, it's not mandatory that health and safety reps are in every workplace, but once again, we want employees to feel that they do have that ability to be represented, and we want that encouragement to happen. And hopefully, with employers, through their safety teams, to be the leaders on this as well. That they work with their fellow workers to bring this to the table and have some sensible conversation around bringing HSRs into the organisation as well. The first three principles of health and safety protection are still very important as well. It covers controlling risks at the highest levels of protection, eliminating or reducing those risks, and taking all reasonably practical measures. So I'm not dismissing those, and they're still very, very important. But when it comes to the worldview of consultation and representation, these two principles are the key. In working back up, with their employer on those other matters as well. We do know that, as I said, there is many pressures and challenges across Victorian workplaces, and it definitely can be a challenge to balance, competing priorities and impacts. We know in that post-COVID world, businesses have had to make a lot of changes, during COVID and now coming out of that post-COVID era. But, ensuring that workplace health and safety doesn't get lost back into that more BAU sense, business as usual within an organisation. We do understand as people day by day drifting away from the COVID world that we all lived in, sometimes, we do hear anecdotally that people are saying, we're hearing that we're going back to the old ways of doing things, the roadblocks that we encountered pre-COVID. We had good working relationships in the workplace. That's now, changed, now in the post-COVID world. So, that changing working environment, but also ways of working have changed. You can't pick up a newspaper or look at an online article these days without seeing something about change of the work week, change of ways of working, more flexible ways of working, the improvement in technology in all facets and aspects of industry. What are those really impacts, and what is that changing workforce and type of work is going to do, and how that relates to health and safety? But how do you consult? If your workforce isn't necessarily in the same room as you, how do you really build that robust sense of consultation and communication, in a world that's a little bit more connected, but also disconnected in the physical sense? Those emerging workplace hazards and risks, as I said, we have, across industries, we do see an uptick, in different types of those hazards and risks, especially in a psychological sense and the psychosocial sense. Those changes, those pressures, work fatigue, work stress, new areas such as work-related gendered violence, including sexual harassment and other aspects as well. How do these things get, balanced and considered in a workplace where everything else is changing as well? The economy, those type of things as well. With workers' injuries and illnesses, how are they impacting the workforce? Because once again, if people are being, sadly injured at work, what does that impact mean to the current workforce? How is that, impacting the way they do things? Is it adding extra stress or fatigue, or added, work pressures to the current workforce. How is that being balanced with a business that also has to balance, budgets and financial aspects to keep their business running day to day? So once again, that's a challenge that businesses have to think about. And then return to work journey for injured workers. WorkSafe has done a lot of work in this area over a number of years in really empowering workers to feel a sense of, they do have a sense of purpose of being and bringing them back into work, but also for workforce, workers, workplaces and workforces to embrace this as well. How do injured workers feel a part of the team and don't feel that disconnect through their journey? So, once again, there's a lot of work pioneering, with other organisations and universities and research organisations to improve this and hopefully make this less of a challenge moving forward. Lack of consultation or understanding consultation on OHS matters. I know a few months ago at a previous Central Safety Group Zoom session like this, we had Kevin talk a bit about this from a HR versus OHS sense of how consultation is seen through different legislation. We know there is two definitions of consultation, one in our legislation in the OHS Act, but also consultation as it's known in the HR, the industrial relations circles through the Fair Work Act. And there is a very different, definition and sense of what these mean. And they both have a related impact to workplace health and safety. But, that's still a challenge that, people here who are safety professionals or work, within a safety team, have to navigate with their managers and with their employer to make sure these messages don't get lost. It's like, hang on, that's a IR message, hang on, it's an OHS message, where's that crossover? And then we do see that sort of dotted line impact to the workforce as well, because they're sometimes being brought into the conversation too late, and then that adds those stresses, brings those workplace hazards and risks back on the table. And then related to that is that, clear understanding of duties and obligations by the duty holders, under the OHS Act. We do know if a business operates in other states, in other jurisdictions, it can be confusing because there has been a lot of changes to the legislation in other states and territories. Victoria hasn't made any big real changes to the OHS Act in a little while. So we do know that can be a hard needle to thread for some workplaces that are on a multi-state national basis, and you might be part of a team that's supporting other jurisdictions. How is everyone getting clear on what happens in Victoria? There is some nuances and there is some differences, around that to make sure that the workers in Victoria, have everything they need under our legislation. Overall, that time, cost, staffing, productivity and output pressures, we know these are competing things that happen in workplaces every day. Doesn't matter if it's your coffee shop or a large, multinational organisation. These things do impact a lot. And health and safety, we don't want to see that as being the thing that gets pushed aside, or it's a line item in a budget that gets, cut. That's up to a business so far as reasonably practical to decide how they're going to, make that change in a workplace to still meet their requirements under the legislation. And there's conflicting priorities. Once again, a business might be going through some growth or change, and bringing those workers along that journey. It may lead to areas of workplace stress and fatigue. If there is change or consolidation in a workplace, all those conflicting priorities where it might put extra pressure on the workforce, and what are those impacts around that health and safety. There's plenty more that impacts the workplace. These are just really the key ones that I've done a lot of research on and talking to people within WorkSafe and in industry. But once again, there's lots more happening that could impact a workplace and how that all interconnects. So how do we really, tackle these challenges? Once again, in our legislation, it's not prescriptive. But we don't WorkSafe in our legislation. We don't sort of print in our book, you must do it this way, you must do it that way. In our legislation, it's up to a business to make those decisions based on the framework of the legislation, how they're going to do it as reasonably practical, and try to make it a safe workplace. The first one, I hear a lot of this anecdotally, and especially from you know, people that are out in the field. You know, seeing workplace safety as a tick and flick exercise. You know, pre-start check, put it in the in-tray. The in-tray sits there and piles up. You know, other aspects of workplace safety, you know, that could become a tick and flick exercise. Well, it might be from a piece of paper, but humans aren't tick and flick. You know, we're dealing with humans. They're doing human work with, you know, human processes using their brains and their body. So, you know, it's really important to really think about that as well, that, you know, safety isn't a tick and flick. You know, there's lots of different models of safety and different, you know, processes and things that an organisation can look at, but how to really, you know, bridge that gap. You know, how a workplace is looking to, you know, embed safeties in their day-to-day operations. And, you know, using, you know, data and in the workplace to shape those improvements. Clear understanding and effective consultation. Really boiling it back to the basics. You know, if businesses are really understanding, you know, where they sit in terms of how they should consult, what they should consult on, you know, and how to bring people into that conversation in a way that builds that trust and that partnership, you know, is really, really important. But also too, you know, if your workplace engages contractors, how are they being brought into that conversation as well? You know, if they're contractors that work day to day within, you know, alongside the rest of your workforce, you know, how are they being felt? Are they, you know, sort of the poor cousins when it comes to health and safety, or, you know, you going outside of what you think is even better and best practice to bring them into that journey? If your workplace has a health and safety committee or some form of committee where health and safety is discussed, you know, is it effective? Is it being used in a way that's really delivering those outcomes? You know, from our legislation that talks about health and safety committees, they have a purpose, they have a function, and we want to ensure that you know, where safety committees exist in a business, that they're thinking along the right ways and the right principles of how to make it an effective committee that you know, is contributing and hopefully making some sort of change within the workplace, and having that, you know, committee run in a way that's sort of smooth and consultative. Bridging further out, you know, if a workplace has the appetite, you know, if they don't already have it, to establish designated work groups, and then, you know, linking into having HSRs represent those designated work groups, having that clear understanding of powers of HSRs, what they can and can't do, you know, and what is an employer's obligation towards health and safety reps. Once again, it's not mandatory. Workplace has HSRs, but the great thing is there is that opportunity, that can be that appetite, and if everyone understands it a little better, you know, that could make a big difference and make things go a long way. Having agreed issue resolution procedures in place, you know, we do know our inspectors do a lot of work in this, you know, going out and talking to businesses about this, and my team as well. You know, are people going back to, you know, these procedures and hopefully solving a lot of health and safety matters, and hopefully navigating a way to get some sort of resolution before an intervention from the regulator is needed. And having that information, instruction, training or supervision in the workforce, how's that being provided? Sometimes those four elements can make a big difference in the workplace and potentially solve some of the problems that a workplace may encounter and some of those challenges in the previous slides. You know, how is work being done safely? You know, how to minimise that risk of harm, and how to engage that workforce better in bringing them into that conversation. You know, how is that being done in a way that there is that good sense of things? Just wanted to bring this up. I'm not going to talk too much about it, so I'd hope that most people in the room here has a really good sense of what an employer's duty to consult and the areas that they should consult on when it comes to health and safety. But there is a lot to it, and as I said, it's very different to the aspect of the HR, the industrial relations side under the Fair Work Act. Under our legislation, you know, it's fairly clear on the elements of where consultation, you know, comes into it. And if HSRs are in the workplace, that employer must involve that HSR, you know, in that consultation. You know, and there's also a separate requirement in the OHS regulations in Victoria around how to involve HSRs further into that consultative discussion as well. So it's really, really important just to think about that as well. And, you know, if we can solve this challenge in every workplace in Victoria, that would be a huge thing that WorkSafe would achieve, you know, and getting, you know, managers and safety professionals and employers really getting this grasp really, really well and really embedding this as part of their, you know, their day-to-day operation, the way they think about this from the consultative side of things. As I talked about earlier around health and safety committees, you know, these could be known as other things in your workplace, depending on how it's being termed. It could be a consultative committee, which might also deal with other things outside of health and safety. You know, we know these committees have kind of come to fruition over years and decades. You know, some may meet the requirement of the legislation, some might not. But the great thing is that, you know, at WorkSafe, we can help, you know, every organisation that has a committee to think about this a little bit better, and we've got some great guidance materials around this. We want everyone to think about those committees, you know, how they're really bringing, you know, employers and employees together, you know, to work cooperatively. You know, that's really important, but also bringing those workers along the journey and use their experience of the jobs and tasks that they do. But also the employers giving their perspective. So having that sense of balance, the employers bringing the sense of what they know, what they understand, and what they maybe need clarity on, and what is the employer's perspective on matters that are talked about from an organisation level. You know, we want to make sure that committees really have a strong purpose, you know, and they're established in consultation with the employees. So that's really important as well. We do know there's a lot of you know, legacy around committees, how they might already exist in workplaces. So it's, you know, thinking about those key principles of making sure of how it was established, and is it established in a way that has that equal partnership to build that trust, to build that cooperation. You know, we want committees to really ensure that they, you know, are there to use to facilitate, formulate, review, and disseminate information, but they're not there to be a mechanism for resolution on health and safety matters. That's not its purpose. You know, there is other mechanisms, you know, in the legislation that talk about how to, you know, deal with issue resolution and how to, you know, improve that in a way that takes it away from the committee, which isn't really the right forum for that. You know, we know that if you've got health and safety representatives in your workplace, you know, they have the powers to address matters directly in consultation with, you know, employers or management. That's really that aspect as well. And if your committee has employer representatives, so people from the business representing, you know, the business side of things, those people on the committee should be persons involved at a senior management level who are able to make decisions about health and safety. It's really, really important that if people from the organisation are sitting on that committee, they need to have that level of authority and oversight, because if it's got to go through then lots more, you know, channels and levels above them, depending on that, it could just blow out the way a committee, you know, functions and you know, is organised. So it's important that committees have that sense of balance of the workers and any health and safety reps if they exist, but also the employer representatives as well, who's representing the business, you know, and how that is seen through a way that can be done effectively as well. So if there's an appetite to bring HSRs into an organisation, we've got to look at the foundation principles. The key is having a designated work group established in the workplace. And as it says here on this slide, DWGs are groupings of employees who share similar workplace health and safety concerns and conditions. Its primary focus is not to be used as anything else. We've seen anecdotally that designated work groups can go through a bit of a HR sort of spiral in terms of people are worried it's going to change an organisational structure or a reporting structure in a workplace. That's not its purpose, it's not its function. The designated work group is established to form the electorate. Who are the employees who basically are going to nominate and choose their health and safety representatives to represent them on health and safety matters. You know, we see this as the best and convenient way to group those employees together, and also that shared interest of bringing those issues to an employer, but also for an employer to have that clear understanding of how to, funnel that information to the different work groups that may exist in an organisation. As that example talks about there, the workplaces in the middle, you might have an office team, you might have a warehousing team, you might have other teams in your organisation, and the work they do might be different, and their risks and hazards might vary as well. So it could be in some workplaces dependent to group people based on that. Some organisations decide that every worker in that location is part of one designated work group. It's important to understand that designated work groups have to be agreed between the employer and their representatives, such as management, and also the workers who want that grouping or who are going to be grouped. It has to be an agreed arrangement. If it's not an agreed arrangement by both parties to come to some outcome that's going to be suitable for both parties to agree upon, then this is where people will usually come to WorkSafe to have one of our inspectors to look into the matter further and determine what is the best outcome. But we hope that with the tools that WorkSafe can provide, can get both parties to the table and hopefully navigate this without that intervention from WorkSafe and one of our inspectors. We can set people up for success in this. Everyday workplaces are thinking about this, especially in a post-COVID world. People are moving around. Workers are being, moved into different locations, but also too, workers that aren't part of an office location, they could be working at home. How are they potentially represented in a way that still has that connection back into their workplace with their fellow workers? So there's a lot of things to think about in this sort of post-COVID world, potentially around designated work groups. Without the designated work group, if it hasn't been formed, then basically you can't have health and safety reps. This is the foundation of the way we see things. The designated work group is the foundation. Then basically the HSRs and building that structure of nominations and elections build on top of that foundation as well. So that can't occur without the designated work group being agreed. And HSRs can't be elected without this principle in place. Now, for workplaces considering HSRs, well, they already have them and they don't have that clarity. Understanding the value and the importance of HSRs is really important. Research has shown that workplaces with HSRs, have employees who are better protected and by having that proactive health and safety strategy, working, collaboratively with their employer. We see this due, to the great actions a HSR can support, including facilitating consultation and communication and providing that crucial link between employees and employers. There's no duties imposed on a HSR in our legislation. It's a voluntary elected role. People still have their day-to-day job to do, they get paid to do, but they might wear a hat as a HSR. They might wear other hats in their organisation, like a first aider or a warden, or some other sort of role that they do outside of their day-to-day job. So we wanted to make sure the HSRs have real clarity around this. And this is, we see that real benefit of HSRs. Is a workplace missing the important piece when it comes to having that HSRs? But also too, in terms of HSRs, we want employers to really think about, HSRs are not there to put duties onto them. They're not there to replace the safety professionals in an organisation. They're not there to conduct, hazard or risk assessments. They're there to represent the workers and to be that two-way conduit. So we want employers to really embrace this, and also the managers and the safety professionals to really think about this in a way that HSRs can be valued if they exist in a workplace, or there's an appetite to have HSRs as well. But why do HSRs have powers? This is talked about quite a bit, people I speak to. HSR is elected. Once they're elected, they have the full suite of powers here in Victoria. A little bit different in some of the other states and territories, where the legislation does have some restrictions to elected HSRs, what they can and can't do until they are trained. In Victoria, it's a little different. The HSR has been elected. They have the full suite of HSR powers available as soon as they are deemed elected. And we encourage all HSRs, to be trained and have that ability to understand more about their role. So, we want HSRs to really think about, they're there to represent the members of their designated work group concerning health and safety. We've got to give them those guardrails, because HSRs, we don't want them to go off reservation and start getting involved in things that aren't related to their fellow workers on health and safety matters. So they may wear other hats in their business. They've got to make sure that if they're the HSR, they've got to think about what is their primary, their role is to represent those fellow workers, and we want employers to embrace that as well. HSRs have the ability to monitor the measures, what is being done, what is put into place, around an employer to comply with the OHS Act and legislation. We want to make sure that HSRs, as I said, are duly elected, so they're not to be chosen. They're not, tapped on the shoulder by management to become HSRs. That does not meet the principle of legislation. HSRs shouldn't have any duties or documents that they must sign, to say that you're a HSR and this is what you can and can't do. That's not imposed on them in our legislation. HSR shouldn't be requested or instructed to conduct inspections or take risk assessments. As I said, they're not also tasked to write or develop policies or procedures by the employer. That's not their job. They're not the safety professional in the business. They're there to represent workers. But they can make inquiries into anything that poses or may pose a risk to health or safety, of the members of the designated work group they represent, and attempt to resolve with their employer any issues concerning health and safety. At the end of the day, still the duty falls upon the duty holder, the employer, around this, to make sure that the workplace health and safety is being managed so far as reasonably practical in our legislation. It's not on the HSR's shoulders to take that burden. And we really want to empower HSRs to make sure they're not falling into that trap, that they're taking the weight of the world on their shoulders. They've got to look after their own health and well-being as well in dealing with health and safety issues. What sort of support is available for workplaces? With building these partnerships in safety, as I said, if you've got a committee, you've got HSRs, but even if you don't have either of those, there's still that requirement for consultation. WorkSafe really wants to, provide that support and guidance, to workplaces. We've got some great guidance materials and compliance codes on our WorkSafe Victoria website. We have our advisory service team. That's our frontline team that people can contact, Monday to Friday, and talk to our specialists on the phone, around these matters and anything else relating to workplace health and safety, and also around workers' compensation as well. Roles like myself as a HSR support officer, as I said, we're tasked to support employers and HSRs, on matters of this as well. We want to make sure that we can really help, build these structures, and give you the tools and training for you to understand what is it you need to do in the workplace in getting this stuff right, getting that consultation foundation, and then that appetite for committees and other things to kind of layer on top of that. We've got a great range of newsletters as well. Some are targeted towards certain industries, some of them more broad. We also produce a monthly newsletter that focuses on matters of consultation, safety committees and representation, including health and safety reps. So we do encourage that, go onto the WorkSafe website, you can subscribe to all our updates, you can choose which ones you want to be on, you can opt out at any time. But also too, we have a full suite of inspectors and specialists that work across various disciplines and specialities. So the great thing is if you're getting to the point when you do need an inspector to deal with a matter, once again, through our advisory team, they can talk you through, talk about some of the other options if you do need to get that high level of intervention. But hopefully there's those things that WorkSafe can provide you, in the earlier stages and that preventative side, to hopefully, avoid that need to call onto our inspectors and specialists as well. At the end of the day, we're not in every workplace. We're not in, we don't have someone sitting in every workplace in Victoria. That's not our role. We're there to regulate and support and educate, every workplace, every business to really get this stuff right. And once again, how can we do that effectively? So some food for thought, to take away, and some actions that you might want to consider moving forward. Around building those better partnerships, I think if you take everything away that we've talked about, that, building that trust, that, that really listening and that effective listening, respect, commitment, and avoiding conflict. Sometimes those things can't always, they don't always happen at all times, at all aspects. Human nature and human condition can sometimes affect these things. But if you build those foundations, I've seen this in, my conversations, my interactions, that if businesses and employees and HSRs are really building these elements, those improved outcomes, just become natural. It's really important. And that attitude and behaviour in dealing with OHS matters, with employees and HSRs, don't make it a tick and flick, make it that sense of those elements. Using that workplace data, knowledge and insights within the workforce, shape those better health and safety outcomes. Use that information. Once again, a committee might come together, look at the last month or the last quarter of what's gone on in the workplace. People nod it, they acknowledge it, it goes in the minutes, and then it's sort of forgotten about. Look at those insights, look at what your workplace is doing. Bring people into those conversations, through that trust, that partnership. Once again, it may lead to those better safety outcomes, through that consultation. It's that two-way process. It's really, really important that there's that equal voice when it comes to these discussions. Having that committee, if you've got the health and safety committees, work with that clear purpose and structure. How's that being embraced? How's it being understood? Committees shouldn't be a place where ideas go to die. They should be a place where they thrive and, hopefully can be implemented and really strive for that best practice. Having that agreed issue resolution procedure in place. If you don't have one in place, once again, we've got some great guidance materials. You can also reach out to my team and others. If you don't have this, understanding or expertise in your workplace, this could help solve a lot of issues in your workplace potentially, and having that clarity around, what are the foundations in getting that right. If you do have health and safety reps in your workplace, make sure that the HSRs, that are there are clear on their powers, and making sure that the employer and their management, that next tier above the top level structure, do they really understand what HSRs are? What are the obligations towards HSRs? What's an employer's duty towards HSRs as well? But also, don't be afraid to ask questions and seek that advice and guidance. Workplace health and safety is ever evolving. Keep that current, that state of current knowledge, current and relevant. That's great, coming to sessions like this today, to continue building on that as well. Once again, safety is evolving, there's always improvements, there's changes in legislation. Keep up to date with that. That helps, build those better partnerships if everyone's informed, more and more around these matters as well. So, as I said, the details of what we talk about today, so will be shared, with everyone today. And as I said, the contact details of my team and others, will be available as well, but also through our advisory service line as well, as a first point of contact if you need some of that more broad intervention support as well. We want to make sure that it's said here at WorkSafe, we set people up for success, and hopefully there's that less of that intervention from our inspectors if businesses are getting this stuff right and everyone's feeling that sense of trust and partnership and that real consultative arrangement in building that better partnership and safety there in the workplace. So thanks everyone. So I guess we'll pass to Nan and we'll go from here. Okay,
well, thank you very much, Mike, for that very clear, concise summary of the consultation, the role of the health and safety reps. I think no matter how long we've been in the industry, we can all learn and reflect on that. There was certainly an interesting query in the chat that came up from Vasso, which was about the employers don't speak English as often a barrier to have effective committees or health and safety reps. Do you have any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, that's an important one. Thanks, Vasso, for your question. Yeah, if there is obviously concerns around, for an employer or workforce where English isn't their first language, it's going to come down to how the employer is dealing with this matter. In terms of providing information, instruction, and training or supervision, to their workforce, employers have obligations around you know, how do they do that, and also providing, you know, information around health and safety in other languages. We've got some great guidance material around this to support people. We also, if people do need support from WorkSafe through our advisory service team, people can also request to go through the translator service. So in terms of WorkSafe providing support, you know, we have that ability that our advisors can, you know, work with people where English isn't their first language, you know, in regards to it. But we do know that workplaces, you know, are evolving. I haven't had a lot of experience in dealing, you know, in this specifically, but I know our advisory team have dealt a lot more with, you know, dealing with people with English or communicating in other languages. Because I've also heard some inquiries about people where they might be hearing impaired or also sight impaired as well. Once again, it isn't just language, it's sometimes there's other methods of communication. So it's about how workplaces embrace that challenge. There's some requirements in it, you know, in our legislation, where there could also be requirements in other types of legislation to you know, in terms of equal opportunity or to avoid discrimination on some of these areas as well.
Right. We've got some, other questions have come through the chat. James had a question around is there a minimum size to have an elected health and safety rep? Like if you've got 2 employees, do you have a health and safety rep or 1 employee?
Yes, that's a good question. There's no minimum requirement. There has to be at least an employee, you know, that you know, is deemed, you know, under a contract that, you know, is deemed an employee under our legislation. You know, in terms of how, you know, they might consider becoming a health and safety rep, it will come down to the conversation between, you know, the employer and their representatives and the employees, however they may be, about how they to be represented. As I said, some workplaces I've found may not have HSRs, but they have really great and robust consultative arrangements. At some workforce I've dealt with HSRs probably haven't really been felt needed because the employees feel so engaged and a very open door two-way conversation. But that doesn't preclude that you can't have a HSR, as long as there's employees in the workplace and they work together to you know, work with their employer in establishing the designated work group. And there's some fundamentals around that as well. And you know, WorkSafe and my team can provide guidance around that as well. Thanks, Mike. I'm just going to invite Hugh, if you'd like to actually pose your question around the election of the health and safety reps and the training.
Yeah, g'day, Mike. I took on the role. There was no contestation for it, so I assumed the role as HSR under the Act. That's actually, there's provision for it. What I want to know is, previously when I was a HSR years ago, when I issued PIN notices because of lack of consultation or it just dissolved, the first question was from WorkSafe inspectors was, are you the elected health and safety rep, and prove it. And I thought, well, this becomes a bit of a conundrum because there was no election because there was no other contestant or other people who wanted to assume the role. So how, if a WorkSafe inspector turns up, how do I present that? I mean, I had a document with signed signatures on it and everyone participated in the elections. That was evidence. So how would I navigate that one?
Yeah, so when say like you're basically duly elected because there was no one outstanding for the role, if it's gone through an election process, an employer has a duty to inform the workforce of who the health and safety rep is. And then they would also, there's also a duty for them to have a current list of health and safety reps.
That's right.
Either displayed in the business or made available, you know, through some method, through an intranet or
which they've done. So there is evidence of me being in that role, but it was an interesting conversation to be had with previous inspectors from the Essendon Fields and other officers. But in terms of the training, I know there's a yearly training. I did the 5-day many years ago, and due to COVID, a lot of us are outside. Probably, I mean, I appreciate that in terms of understanding the powers and also the boundaries that you're sort of working within. Would you say, in terms of 5-day, if you haven't done it for say 10, 15 years, would you recommend doing another 5-day or just stay with another 1-day course? It'll
come down to a couple of things. So, you know, some people may choose that they've done the 5-day course. and potentially they've had a couple of, you know, various terms of office as a HSR. They've been re-elected a number of times. There's nothing primarily precluding a HSR from going back and doing the 5-day course again. It'll come down to if there's been, I would say, if there's been substantive changes to legislation since you did the 5-day course. But hopefully, if you're doing, you're attending the yearly refresher, 1-day refreshers that HSRs are entitled to, and the legislation, that there's enough of that, hopefully current updates that you might be getting as a HSR, you know, during that period. You know, it also, you know, at the end of the day, when it comes to HSR training, that it really comes down to that an employer needs to support HSRs when they do request training, as long as they give a minimum of 14 days or more notice to an employer. And also the HSR has the ability to choose which HSR course they feel is appropriate.
I've done a trades hall was a brilliant one, and I've often opted for that one.
Yeah, and we've got over 50 plus training providers across Victoria, depending on where people are located. Some of them offer you know, different types of topics as they go along, especially in their refresher you know, training as well. So it's going to really come down to what benefit you feel it could be appropriate as a significant change. Especially if you may have been in and out of a HSR across a number of years. You might have been maybe not elected over a period of time, you got re-elected a number of years later. But as I said, it will come down to obviously how you feel it's appropriate, what is the support you need, what might have changed, and also too, as I said, how you've been keeping up to date if you've been attending the yearly you know, 1-day refreshers as well.
Cool.
Actually,
Thank you.
on the basis of that training, does WorkSafe review the approved trainers regularly that are offered on the website?
So we have a team of that looks after the HSR training side of things. So they go out and audit the approved providers. So they, you know, make sure they basically, you know, watch how the class participates, how it works, is it meeting the learning principles and the learning outcomes of the course. And then they you know, make decisions on obviously if, you know, if there needs to be improvements or they're meeting the requirements. So there's a lot of work that goes into it, but also too, there's lots of different forums and workshops our training providers go through. So they're kept up to date and they're keeping their level of knowledge and experience in the HSR world, you know, up to date and comprehensive as well.
Oh, that's good to know.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just conscious of the time. Barry Naismith has raised a question, which I think is a whole different presentation in itself, Barry. So I might close off the recording, but certainly I'd invite the participants to stay online and you can continue to talk with Mike without the recording. And so I just close the formal session and thank Mike for his fabulous presentation. It's certainly food for thought and we can all do things better. And as a wrap up, just remind you that the recording will be available on the Central Safety Group website for financial members for viewing, and our next presentation will be on Wednesday. That's after the King's birthday long weekend, Wednesday the 14th of June out at Holmes Glen Chadstone campus for the tunnelling, Victorian Tunnelling Centre. So thank you, Mike, that was fabulous. And so I'll leave you, but I encourage others to stay online and continue those conversations. So thank you very, very much.